Hey everyone, in this video, I'm going to tell you why being too polite and too respectful can actually hurt your communication instead of making you look good. Let's take a look at why. So being polite, respectful, and even obedient to a degree is good. And I have a lot of clients, especially those that come from an executive or a political background, that behave like this. So what happens is they're very neutral, they're very diplomatic, they don't show any emotion, and they're just there to even the scales, if you will. They're just there to maintain a very professional, very plastic image, if you will, without showing any emotion or any vulnerability. They cultivate a very professional and a very impersonal image, if you will, which works very well in a lot of corporate and political contexts. But the problem is, it can hurt your communication because you're not vulnerable, you're not authentic. And if you really want to cultivate charisma, you have to inject at least some level of emotion. You don't need to be too emotional, but you also can't just be polite and respectful, because otherwise people don't see you as an actual person. So there are actually two major problems with being too polite and too respectful. The first is that you communicate low value in a social or evolutionary way. What I mean by this is the following. When someone has power, they're very free, they're very nimble, they don't worry about the opinions of others, they just say what they want, they're almost casual. And you even see this in the executive boardroom. For example, the executives who are trying to prove themselves use a lot of jargon. They're very polite, buttoned up, and they say all the right things, but they don't really seem like people. They're very plastic in their image. And on the other hand, you have the powerful CEO who seems to just not care. They speak casually, they say what they want, they don't seem to be walking on eggshells, they just act in whatever way they want. And this is the first lesson, which is you communicate power when you are relaxed, when you are not trying to seek validation, and when you are not trying to seek approval from others. You just do what you want, and you don't really care whether others like you or not. And I'm not saying this in an extreme manner, okay? I'm not saying to be arrogant or to be careless, but I am saying to not be constrained by the need for approval. Because in social terms and in evolutionary terms, what you communicate when you need approval and when you're very obedient is that you are not a full person. You need someone's approval, you need someone's permission, and you don't have authority or credibility or power. But when you communicate that you really don't care about other people's reactions and that you can say whatever you want or do whatever you want, you communicate that you are a full person, that you are aware of your value and that you have power. The second problem with being too polite and too plastic is that it doesn't communicate authenticity or vulnerability. That is, some of the best presenters have to show a small personal part of themselves. They have to show a little bit of vulnerability, a little bit of authenticity by sharing something personal. You don't need to degenerate into what is called vulnerability porn, where you are actively sharing weaknesses just to get reactions from people. That's an extreme. The goal should be for you to be powerful, but also to share a little bit of your personal life, and even a little bit of weakness, because someone with power openly shares their weakness because they know that they still have power. But someone who is afraid that they don't have power, they're not going to share any weakness because they feel defensive about them. If you think about it, the people who have the most power are the ones who are the most comfortable about their shortcomings. So the question also becomes, if you're very polite and stiff, how can you become more charismatic, showing more emotion? There are usually two major techniques. The first is to share your likes and interests, and the second is to share personal experiences. So let's start with the likes and interests. This is just talking about what you like and what you don't. And this can be about anything in life. You can say, hey, I really like this food, I really like this building, I really like this city. What happens is you are demonstrating emotion. And the negative can work as well. You can say, hey, I really dislike this type of food, or I really dislike this type of building, or whatever it is. Naturally, you don't want to get into sensitive topics like politics or religion, or in Europe, football teams. What you want to do is you want to talk about general things, but you want to have stronger opinions about those things, because this communicates charisma. You probably know that person that likes everything, or that has no opinion about anything, or everything is fine by them. They're not necessarily weaker as a person because of this, but they don't show emotion, and it's harder to show charisma without showing these emotions. So these are simple statements such as saying, I like this, I dislike this, I really enjoy this, I really did not enjoy that at all, and so on. They just make you show more emotion. The second is sharing personal experiences or relationships with other people. That is, complimenting someone for how they've helped you, or complimenting them on something that you're doing really well, or just sharing an experience from your life, a professional career experience, or even a childhood experience, and so on. Let's take, for example, a politician. If they seem very neutral and you know nothing about them, it's hard to be charismatic. But now, let's say that they tell you about their childhood experience and they say, hey, my view on this policy or whatever it is because when I was a child, I really saw the impact of hunger or crime or whatever it is. They seem a little bit more of a person. In many cases, you don't even know if the story is real or not, but that's another point, okay? Just by sharing a personal story or a memory or something else, it makes you seem more personal because people know more about you as a person. And the same for compliments in terms of other people. When you compliment someone on something, you are sharing why you value that something. So for example, if you compliment an old coworker or an old mentor because of their loyalty or their principles, you are sharing to other people that you value those specific traits. So it tells them more about you personally. I would say that in general, just caring a little bit less about the approval from others and just sharing more emotion makes you seem higher value. And it shows more of your charisma and your personality. That is, not always saying the right thing in order to try and get validation or approval, but even risking saying the wrong thing. In many cases, saying the wrong thing and then fixing it or apologizing for it or correcting it is more charismatic than always saying the right thing in the first place. This is an actual persuasion weapon, which is when you make a mistake and you make up for it, you are much more likely to be liked by someone than if you never made the mistake in the first place. Because it's almost like the person is saying, hey, we went through this experience together, and I know that if things get tough, this person reacts the way that I expect them to, versus a person who you never know how they're going to react if things get tough. Naturally, there is a spectrum here, as with many things in life. On one hand, you have people who are too stiff, too polite, and show no emotion. And on the other hand, you have people who are just reckless. They may be very charismatic, but they cause a lot of problems socially. Maybe they insult others, maybe they say things without speaking, and so on. You don't need to be in one of the extremes, but the thing is, if you're very polite and stiff, you want to take that extreme and just move a little bit more towards emotion. In many cases, just sharing a little bit of emotion here and there, or just sharing one experience already goes a long way. And finally, it's very important to state that you may feel vulnerable in this process, because what happens is, in many cases, this kind of polite, plastic, and stiff image is something that the person does precisely to protect them against emotion, because they may not feel comfortable speaking about their emotions or their experience. They may think, I'm going to be attacked or judged, so because of that, I'm never going to share emotion in the first place, because that way I can't get attacked. But what happens is, when you start showing emotion, you are putting yourself precisely in the firing range of people. But this is a flawed process in terms of thinking, because to be very honest with you, you are going to be judged no matter what you do. If you share no emotion and you're very polite and stiff, you are going to be judged for behaving like that. If you share too much emotion, you are going to be judged for behaving like that. In other words, don't worry about feeling vulnerable because you were always vulnerable to begin with. You may not realize it because you are now using emotion, but you were always a target, and people who want to criticize are always going to find a way to criticize. So this change in emotion is not going to be what changes that. In other words, people are always going to criticize you, so you might as well do whatever you want in terms of communication. So to summarize, being too polite and plastic and stiff can work in some contexts, but you are going to lack charisma because you don't show emotion at all. And a lot of people are not even going to see the personal side of you. There are two major problems with this. The first is that it communicates low value because it communicates that you need someone's approval or that you need permission from someone to communicate, and it also doesn't show how you are as a person. And as we commented, there are two main ways to improve this situation. Either you share more emotion, so you talk about your likes, your dislikes, what you enjoy, what you don't, or you share something about your personal experience, why you admire someone, a meaningful experience that you went through, or something else about your personal life. And finally, remember, you don't want to go from full polite to fully reckless. You just want to take it one step further. In many cases, if you're very polite and plastic, just sharing a little bit more of emotion or one single experience already goes a long way, because it's the difference between someone not seeing the human side of you and actually seeing it. If you've enjoyed the video, consider liking and subscribing. And remember to check out the channel for more persuasion, negotiation, sales, and other techniques. Thank you so much for watching.